Hey everyone, how's it going? Hope you're all having a good weekend. It's Blake with ChessPathways.com, and we're back today to analyze another game of one of our members. This game was sent to me by one of our Chess Pathways members who had the white pieces in this game, and his username was IBrag cause I win, which turned out to be true in this game actually. Usually I don't analyze games of players who won the game, but he had some nice annotations, and he did make some mistakes and had some things he wanted to learn from, so I thought this could be a good learning experience. So here we go, e4, c6. So he's on the white side of the Caro-Kann here. He chooses this line with knight d2. This is all the main line. Bishop f5, knight g3, bishop g6, knight f3, and knight to f6. So instead of knight f3, the most common way to play here is playing h4, trying to expand on the king side, and a lot of times white is going to castle queen side on these lines. He played kind of the older-fashioned way, if you will, just with knight f3, bishop d3, just developing the pieces, not worried about expanding on the king side like a lot of players do these days. And there's nothing wrong with this. It's not considered the most fashionable attempt to get an advantage for white, but white certainly has a fine position here. White's just developing a bunch of their pieces, and they're going to get castled soon too. So e6, bishop e3, bishop d6. White played c3, and they said that they're not worried about getting doubled pawns after bishop takes g3 because of h takes g3. Yeah, that's not really a concern here at all for white. This knight is actually not that well placed of a piece in this line, actually. It's kind of restricted. So if black's willing to give up their good dark-squared bishop for this knight and develop our rook for us, move this pawn to the g-file and open our rook's file, that's not a concern at all. These doubled pawns aren't really weaknesses. Knight b to d7, queen c2. You did mention you played this to prepare the trade. I'm not really sure what you're talking about there. If you want to take on g6, you can take on g6 whenever you want. And actually now if black takes on d3, you kind of lose a tempo, because now instead of taking in one turn, you kind of moved your queen and now you're going to take on d3. So I'm not sure why you need to prepare this trade. If you want to trade bishops, you can do it now. So queen c2, knight to b6. Alright, you go ahead and exchange on g6 and you castle queenside. And you had kind of an interesting comment for why you chose to do so. You said you castle queenside because if black does ever take on g3 and you take with the h-pawn, you want to have the open h-file for your rook. Yeah, that makes a little sense, but again, that's just not really a concern. I think even if you castle kingside, black's probably not going to go for that idea. Anyway, knight f to d5, bishop d2. And you say you don't want to exchange your bishop yet for that knight. And now knight c4. So the black knights here look pretty comfortably placed here on these central squares. I'm kind of curious what your actual plan is in this position. You kind of sound like you're just kind of thinking move by move. You haven't really made any mention in your annotations yet of any kind of long-term plan or what you're trying to achieve here, which is sometimes okay. This is the kind of position where there's not one super clear long-term plan that either side is going to follow. You do just kind of want to get your pieces into the game, keep developing. One thing I'm not sure if you noticed is the pawn structure. That's always something to consider when we're talking about long-term planning. We have what's called the Caro-Slav pawn structure, which, as you can tell by the name, is common from the Caro-Kann defense, from the Slav defense, from some lines in the French defense. You'll see this structure over and over from a lot of openings, sometimes with white having the one pawn in the center, sometimes with black having the pawn in the center. It doesn't really matter, although it usually is white. But usually in this position, one of black's main goals is going to be to break eventually with c5 or e5 to eliminate white's space advantage. That's going to be something black is trying to organize. And sometimes white in this position will be trying to expand with playing c4, trying to grab more space. Sometimes a breakthrough with d5 works out really well if there's a rook on the e-file, possibly a knight hopping into e5. White can generate some activity that way. So just knowing some possible long-term plans based on this pawn structure could kind of help give some structure to your thinking process. Just like one thing I noticed here, going back to after you played 9 pawn to c3, you said you're not worried about bishop takes g3. Okay, that makes sense. But I'm just wondering, why c3 then? There's a whole lot of moves you could play here, and you chose c3, and you didn't give much of a sense of why you chose c3. Because there's a lot of plans you could play here. You could play for castling queenside, possibly, and attacking on the king side. You could castle kingside and try to expand in the center with c4, like I just talked about. Plop a rook on the e-file, throw a knight onto e5, maybe try to break through with d5 at some point. Or you can just play this position with the pawn on c3 and just have this really stable center. But the question then is, what do you do? If black doesn't really do much besides develop their pieces, what do you want to do if you just want to play this solid structure? So I'm just curious, how much thinking you put in here to possibly planning more in the long term. Okay, let's get back to the game. So castle, knight after d5, bishop b2, knight c4, and you played knight to e5. And you made a really interesting comment here. So this seems to fail by the counting tactic, right? One of the simpler tactics. Black simply has 2 attackers on this piece, right? We only have 1 defender, so it looks like black can win a pawn. And it seems like you saw this, but you had an explanation here. You said that if they took your knight, then you're going to recapture with the pawn, and then if he captures with the bishop, then you're going to move your bishop out of the way and play c4 and win the knight. Okay, so let's try to see what you're talking about here. You're saying that if black takes your knight, you're going to take back, and then you're not afraid of them taking with the bishop because you said that now you want to move your bishop out of the way somewhere, and then you're going to play c4 and win the knight because of this pin. And that would be great if you got 2 moves in this position, but you don't. So I'm not entirely sure how we can make this work, actually. Like, what do we play here? You said you want to move your bishop out of the way. Where exactly? I guess we can put it on e3. And then I don't see what tactic we're really going to have after black just plays queen c7. This looks like we're just down a pawn. Yeah, I don't think this works. So to me, this sounds like kind of a hand-waving calculation you did, which I've been guilty of too, but it's a very dangerous mindset to get in. You see that knight e5 potentially is going to lose a pawn. You saw that black had 2 attackers here. But instead of really trying to calculate this out and figure out what's going on, it sounds like you just said, yeah, black can take my pawn, but then maybe I have some pin on the d-file, and if black's not careful, I can win a piece and I'll be winning. It's not, a real attempt at going move by move, trying to find the best ideas for your opponent. It's more just wishful thinking, is the way that I'm kind of reading this here. And I've been guilty of it too. I think every chess player has been guilty of this. So it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just something to learn from. You always need to make that attempt to really get in your opponent's head, especially when you see that, material is going to start coming off the board here. You see that you're giving up a pawn. And if your idea doesn't work here, if there's no pin that, you can make any use of, you are just going to be down a pawn, which is a big deal. And so in those situations, you really do need to put in that effort to find the best moves for your opponent, find the ideas for both sides, and really try to figure out what's going on instead of just hand-waving the decision away. So after knight e5, black took on d2, which, again, I'm not entirely sure why they can't just win a pawn here and take on e5. I guess black missed this idea as well. So black took on d2. You go ahead and recapture with that rook. Yeah, and you're still talking about this pin. You say that you're kind of hoping that black takes that knight, and then you'll take, and then there will be some pin on the d-file. Knight to f4, attacking your g2 pawn, so you go ahead and defend it. Queen to f6, and you play f3 to add the rook to support g2 instead of the queen. Yeah, I think this position here is just roughly equal. I don't think either side has any, huge problem here. Rook to h4, threatening potentially some discoveries on your queen. And then here you played knight takes c6. You saw this tactic where if black takes your knight, then you'll get to take, and you'll fork the king and rook. Yeah, so again, it seems like you were really focused on your own ideas here, which it's great that you saw that tactic, but you didn't stop to think about what your opponent's tactical possibilities might be, because black just has a little discovery here on your queen with knight h5, and this move was actually not a forcing move, knight takes c6. There's no threat that comes with this move. Black's not forced to really address this right away, and now with this discovery on your queen, you really have no good way out of this situation. If you move your queen away, now black can just take that knight, and your fork doesn't work anymore, and you're just down a piece. And there's no real way to get out of this, unfortunately. So far, I think the biggest takeaway from this game, just from what I've seen so far, is just always ask yourself, what's my opponent going to do if I make this move, and really make that honest effort to find the best moves for your opponent. Don't think about the moves you hope they'll make. Don't say, I'm going to take on c6 here, and hopefully they'll fall for this, right? They'll take, and then I'm going to take and fork them, and I'm going to win. Or what you did earlier, you said, I'm going to sacrifice a pawn here because, hopefully my opponent falls for this pin on the d-file, even though they're completely not forced to fall for that pin on the d-file. So don't think about the moves for your opponent you hope they'll make. Think about, put an honest effort, find the best moves for your opponent, and you'll be able to spot these tactics a lot easier. So knight takes h5. Yeah, so you're temporarily kind of defending your queen because you're attacking the queen right back, but black can just take that knight, and you have the same problem here. Your queen's going to have to move away, unfortunately, and you're going to lose this knight. Or, I guess in the game you tried g4, but now bishop f4. Yeah, this tactic's a problem too. So you played knight to e5, defending that knight, and now you're attacking the b7 pawn, as you mentioned. Bishop takes d2, king d2, castle long, and you play a4. You just start expanding on the queen side. Black takes on g4. You go ahead and take with the knight. Queen g5 check. King d3, yeah, black is winning here. But now it looks like black makes a big mistake here. Black plays f5, and again, this is kind of the same problem, but now your opponent's doing it. It looks like, he probably got so excited at his own tactical idea here, seeing that he could fork your queen and knight, that he completely forgot to ask how is white going to respond to this? What's white's best move here? Because it's very easy to see queen takes e6, right? No one's going to miss that move if they try to find it, but black probably didn't try to find it and just got excited with their own ideas here. Queen takes e6, and now white's alive. So black gets out of check. You play knight to e5. Oops, hit the wrong button. Yeah, so knight to e5. And now queen to f6 from your opponent. And yeah, I agree with your statement here that this was a serious blunder too. So f5 was a big mistake by your opponent, giving you the e6 pawn. And now queen f6, allowing this knight d7 tactic. So now white's actually up material. Now white's up 2 pawns. Their king is on d3, but it's not actually that easy to get to. Now I think white's just doing very well. Queen a6 check, king c2 check, king to b3. Yeah, rook has to come back to defend the back rank checkmate that was threatened. Queen takes f5, and yeah, this is now winning for white. White's just up a lot of material here. And you were able to get the queens off the board. The rook endgame is one of the harder endgames to convert when you're up material, but up so many pawns, of course, it doesn't matter. It definitely makes sense to get the queens off the board, just eliminate any threats to your king, and you're just going to easily win this endgame. You put the rook behind the passed pawn, and your opponent resigns. You have all sorts of ways to win this. You're just going to advance your pawns, advance your king, expand on the queen side. Just the 3 extra pawns, it's going to be way too difficult, impossible really, for black to defend this position. So okay, good game. Mutual mistakes there. The game was equal for a while. You didn't really have a plan out of the opening, and things just turned out to be kind of equal. And then you made that blunder, from my perspective, largely because you weren't taking your opponent's ideas into account. You were kind of going by wishful thinking, seeing all the ways your opponent could go wrong, instead of trying to find their best moves. And then your opponent kind of did the same thing when they started blundering with f5, failing to take your ideas into account. And in the end, black's the one who kind of made the last blunder, as they say, and you came away with the victory. Good game. If you want your games analyzed, please sign up today. ChessPathways.com is the website. We have exclusive content, contests for you. We're analyzing the games of a lot of our members. You'll get updates whenever new videos or blog posts come out, so please check out the site. And I will see you again in a future video very shortly.